Hi, everybody. So given the title of my speech, as opposed to the first speaker, I do feel like I do need to switch things up given what's been happening in the last 24 hours. So if you'll forgive me for a little bit of a free flow, I was initially going to talk to you about why a background with 10 words could be worth tens of thousands of dollars, apparently. I was going to talk to you about algo stables and tell you, what the learnings are and whether these things are sustainable or not possible. I was going to tell you why people claim that you can have a sustainable 7,600% yield. But instead, I have to address the elephant in the room, which is, why is my tongue blue? So that's because I am experimenting with a powerful nootropic, because experiments are good, and sometimes they take us to places where we learn something incredibly valuable. But as we've been seeing sometimes, we realize that we are very early. We are so early, in fact, that what we're learning is that sometimes nobody really knows what they're doing. And I kind of want to touch upon psychology instead of getting into a lot of technical things instead. So let's start with a quote from Matt Levine, who is maybe the best financial journalist out there. He recently did a really amazing deep dive into crypto from an outsider's view, and he's giving us like an objective perspective of a neutral third party who really understands, finance and technology. And, his point is, crypto is recreating a lot of things that we've seen already in the traditional world, but it's also giving us a lot of new experiments that sometimes are really, really bad and sometimes are quite promising and can lead us somewhere. But I want to start with something that is timeless. Since Homo sapiens have existed, one of the most powerful forces is greed. And some people will say greed is good, but it doesn't even matter if greed is good or not. Greed is powerful. And a lot of the people that are showing up at events like this, a lot of the millions of people that are in the space, there's a lot of interesting technology, there's a lot of puzzles and a lot of forward-looking things that we want to learn about. But there's a lot of energy that is brought on because people want to make money, they want to get resources, we're kind of wired that way. And it doesn't matter if you are at the bottom of the pyramid or if you have made billions of dollars. You have literally a money-making machine that can make 8 figures a day, and you don't have to do anything. And even those people, as I have seen from the front row, and actually even been on the stage with them many times, these things are universal to everybody. So if you're a retail person, we see 1.8 million followers for people who want to believe a model that says, just buy Bitcoin, wait 15 years, and every dollar you put in will be worth $10 million, and this is a mathematical fact. This is kind of scientifically something that you can trust. And, these things have a virality, same as, talking about a super cycle. And if somebody says, maybe there's not going to be a super cycle, some people will listen and some people will pay attention. But at the same time, there will be a lot of people that will kind of not retweet it. It won't get those same viralness. And virality is such an important concept in the world in general, in politics, as we see, in many countries, it just comes down to the virality of a meme, but also in crypto especially. We saw a tweet this morning. Su Zhu, kind of one of the, as he says, so he was kind of a poster boy, obviously, for Golden Child for the cycle. After 4 months of not speaking, he's kind of expressed a little bit what it is like, not just for being somebody who is hoping that they can make 10,000x, but somebody who has already made it. And what we learn is that greed is something that does not go away. It's just riding the next wave and surfing the next wave and doing the most good, the most global impact for good. So what we see is that it doesn't slow down. There's a reflexivity that only picks up as you go up. And some of these things, as Matt Levine says, are not new at all. Moral hazard has been around for a very long time. This is very basic game theory. So what moral hazard basically says is if you can take a risk where the upside you can capture and the downside is somebody else's problem, that creates a very powerful incentive to sometimes act in ways that most of us would consider to be inappropriate or possibly, immoral. And we're seeing like many versions of this now. We see this with, Celsius, places that will tell you like, you can get 10% on yield, and they'll go back to somebody else who's promising them 20%. Now, whether this person gives them 20% or not, they hope they do because that's their business. They want to make this 10%. But then if they don't, if that does not happen, that's not necessarily going to be out of their pocket. Of course, they will have a lot of downside, in reputationally in other ways. But this is the same tale that we've seen throughout. And it's even more powerful in crypto. There's two reasons. When you go up in crypto, this is such a new technology that nobody knows where the upside is. Should something be worth $5 billion? Should it be worth $10 billion, 20, 100? Some of these coins like Cardano, really interesting technologies, but even being very early, nobody knows how to value them. So you get this incredible reflexivity on the way up. And then, of course, on the way down, there's nobody guaranteeing a floor price. Nobody knows exactly, okay, worst case, Bitcoin is going to be worth $10,000. That is not a guarantee because intrinsically, we're still all collectively figuring out where we ascribe value. And this is a psychological game that is still very early on. And a lot of times, what gets even more confusing, especially like people like myself, I spent a decade in traditional finance, in quantitative trading, a very objective place where you really look at figures and facts. And sometimes you realize that memes are actually more powerful than fundamentals in crypto. At least in the during a bull market, you see that if you go and you start becoming a real product, and you go from an idea to having actual revenue, you're no longer a pure play. People can point things out. There's flaws. Your blockchain is going down sometimes. There's all kinds of nitpicking from the community. While if you just stay a meme, there is a power to that. So this makes it very confusing and very hard to value assets in this space. The other thing with memes is that they are so important to creating the virality in the communities that ultimately build events like this and much bigger ecosystems in the world. And sometimes the memes are not necessarily accurate. So they're very good at creating a community. How many of you have heard of 3-3? Can I see anyone who knows what 3-3 is? Okay, we have some DeFi natives here. So 3-3 is basically a meme that Olympus DAO created. And the idea of 3-3 is a great idea. It says if we all collectively get together and just kind of cooperate, we will all be rich together. We will all be successful together. We will create this new world, this new future for us together. And 3-3 is a game theory concept. And being a game theorist myself, this has kind of always been my specialty in all my degrees. I looked at what they claim to be 3-3. And they basically say that, if nobody sells, we all get rich. If people sell, then it's bad. It's minus 3-3. So this meme was so powerful. On Twitter, you would see many, many thousands of people have 3-3 in their profile. This kind of grew to be worth billions of dollars for their currency. And their currency was basically a meme based on bad game theory. And sometimes that can work for a while, but eventually what happens is the truth and the fundamentals do catch up many times. So the first problem that happens is if you have a good meme, people will fork your meme. So we saw this with Olympus DAO. So on the right, on the left, you have Zeus. So Zeus is the founder of Olympus DAO. And a lot of people, as we do in crypto, when you have open source code, they take the code, they fork it. It doesn't cost a lot of money. You change the name, you change certain attributes about it, So, we had a very famous example. The first really famous example after a sushi swap, maybe, was Wonderland. So you have the Frog Nation, who basically took the same idea, created a different meme spin on it around, we're all frogs, and this is kind of like the plebs and the community against the overlords. And they basically stole some of the fire. So one of the things that happens with memes is dilution. And while Olympus DAO was very successful because it promised 6,000% yields, the next guy just comes along and says, I will give you 80,000% yields. And then the next one says 30,000% yield. So this concept that draws in retail, that basically says, you can just make free money and print it every day. And even if the price goes down a little bit, that's OK, because you're making so much yield. And some of these figures just become astronomical, obviously. You have things like HoneyDAO, millions of % of yield. And it kind of has always made me think, judging from first principles, is it good to have more, or is scarcity kind of really important? And of course, Bitcoin was built on the belief that there are 21 million Bitcoin. This is a scarce resource, and this is kind of what creates value. And I've had quite a few discussions with people in the space, like Suzu, who's a famous example. We had a very long chat about Dogecoin. And Dogecoin tries to be another currency. So it says, there's Bitcoin, and we can just make a new one and make it funny, and it's just going to keep creating more virality and more people. And of course, ultimately, this comes down to coordination. And coordination is very hard to do when there's a lot of new things coming up. You really need everybody to coordinate and accept that, Dogecoin is money, or Olympus DAO is money, or Wonderland is money. And if they don't coordinate, ultimately, things start to fall apart. We have it with Dogecoin, and then we have Shiba Inu. And I don't know how many of you are degens in here, but there is World Cup Inu, and World Cup Inu is, performing really well right now. So what does this mean? There is kind of a spectrum of Ponzi-ness. And, on the one hand, you have criminality. So famous examples being like BitConnect. And on the other hand, you have things that are legitimately creating utility. They're allowing people to get a service in exchange for revenue, like Uniswap, for example. And in the middle, you have things that potentially are trying to become sustainable. Famous example being Axie Infinity, where they have this tokenomics model, which ultimately, I don't know how many of you actually played Axie, but the reflexivity on the way up of Axie also resulted in a price crash because the game itself did not manage to become fun to the extent that people would pay money. So why do I have Rafa Nadal here? Ultimately, to create sustainability, the key ingredient is you need to have a benefactor who is not in it for money. They are gaining something else. So if you have Rafa Nadal at your poker table, while he might be incredible on a tennis court, he's probably going to lose money at the poker table. But maybe that's fine because he's getting entertainment, he's getting utility in some other way. And this is a sustainable model where someone is actually kind of gaining a service or entertainment in exchange for money. If everyone is in it just for money, there is the first law of Ponzi-nomics, which basically says you can't just create money when you put it in a box. It cannot grow into new money. So this is kind of a concept that a lot of people miss when the hype kind of picks up. Eventually, what starts to happen is the hype dies down, and as we see with something like FTX, part of the reason why FTX was a very successful and important exchange was because a lot of people trusted that they are backed, they have a lot of money, they're doing things properly. Once one of the things in the equation starts to come out, there is a death spiral because no longer people will trust them to custody their money. There's kind of like a dynamic where we see this with DeFi protocols in general. As the yields start to decrease because they're not sustainable, if you don't have sustainable yields, the next step is activity starts to drain out of the system. And then eventually, people exit and everybody realizes this is not worth much. And a very simple way to think about it is the Caveman Classic, which basically says you can take real money, you can issue a coupon against it, you can convince people that this coupon is representing the actual wealth, the real money that you have there. And the more you can convince them and create incentives and create APYs, you create this like flywheel effect. But ultimately, you're going to end up being unbacked. And this is something that we saw with Luna, which was unbacked to a large extent. It's something that we see with a lot of currencies that get created. So just some closing remarks. General things that I've been thinking about, experiencing the last few years. One is, there's scams and there's gambling. And gambling will always be a part of this industry because it's exciting, it creates entertainment. There's a reason why Las Vegas still exists and is very popular. And there is entertainment. I don't know how many of you guys watched this viral clip of a token called Squid DAO, which was getting rugged while somebody was streaming live. And this thing was going up to trillions of dollars of market cap, and then in 1 second, yow, it just goes to zero, right? I see you guys shaking. So I think that's not as bad as some of the financial instruments that we're being promised, like Luna or Olympus DAO, because ultimately, people know Squid Game is not going to make them rich. They're playing this game for fun. It's sort of a who can get out first musical chairs, while they're not being promised and being tricked to put, no one's putting their life savings into Squid DAO, I hope. Another thing we saw is that we're relearning a lot of the financial learnings from traditional finance, something like price discovery. So we had AMMs, part of DeFi, and AMMs were very popular for a while. But what you're doing when you're putting your money as a liquidity provider who's passive is you're basically writing options. As soon as there's volatility, you're going to lose a lot of money from that volatility. And protocols were kind of giving tokens as APY to make up for that fact. But ultimately, price discovery has to happen with professional market makers. Otherwise, these pool 2 incentives run out. So this is something that we're kind of relearning. This is like a relearning of finance. Another thing is how to value layer ones. And I recently talked about Ethereum quite a lot because the merge was happening. And people were trying to figure out, is the merge priced in? What is the value of Ethereum? And sometimes what I find with crypto is that you get these extremely complex dynamics. Like here we have something I built from scratch, but this really shows you all the key stake players that are involved in a blockchain. You have people paying gas fees, and then MEV is going over there, and then validators, and intermediaries are getting commissions. You have these complex systems, but when you break it down to first principles, which is really what we need to do as we're like going through all these experiments, you realize all that matters is like the users. Are they willing to pay gas fees because they're getting utility? And then the ecosystem can survive. All the rest is sort of short-term Ponzi-nomics. And I'll leave you with this. The most important thing of all is probably coordination. As I've said, scarcity and dilution is such a huge part of whether value accrues or whether value gets drained out. And unfortunately, as people look after their own self-interest and they look after, what is my own best move to make in this game, as opposed to collectively, those two things sometimes clash. And that's sometimes referred to as the tragedy of the commons. We all want to have a really nice grass field in the middle of our town, but if no one is willing to put the work and actually make that happen, it's not going to exist. So if there's one thing to learn from all these experiments that I hope you take with you, is that we have to find common sources of coordination. If we all just kind of make a new shitcoin and a new kind of meme, we won't actually ever be able to coordinate enough and move forward together as an industry. Thank you.